Our last presentation of the afternoon is from Laura Stokes. Laura Stokes is the performing arts librarian at Brown University. And a doctoral candidate in musicology at Indiana University. Before moving to Brown, she was a visiting lecturer in musicology at Indiana, where she also worked for the Variations Project. Laura holds a Master's of Arts in Musicology from Indiana University, and she is in the final stages of her dissertation on music and cultural politics in mid-19th century Prussia. The research for this dissertation took her to a wide range of libraries and archives across the United States and Europe. Laura holds a Master of Science in Science and Information from the University of Michigan and a Bachelor of Arts in Music from Carleton College. She has presented her research on Felix Mendelssohn, Fanny Hensel, Meyerbeer, and at meetings and conferences in the United States and the United Kingdom. She is an assistant editor for MLA's Journal Notes and the chair of the New England Music Library Association. Please join me in welcoming Laura.
Uncovering the answers to these questions took me on a bibliographic detective hunt that reached far beyond the comparatively easy question of the publication history of Mendelssohn's liturgical work, and led me to approach larger questions about which itself forms a parallel narrative to the well-known phenomenon of German nationalism in sacred music at this time, which was epitomized by Bach. So, the first question, of course, was what was Musica sacra and how could I get my hands on it? This question alone proved much more complicated than I thought it would. So, and I must apologize, these scans out of higher look great on my machine, but when I started okay. So, I will explain what's on there. So, a library reference tool that presented some useful, although not quite accurate or wide-reaching enough information was Anna Meyer's classic historical sets, collected editions, and monuments of music. And if there are any index to printed music fans in the audience, as of Monday, Musica sacra was still not included in index to printed music. So, we'll update. From higher, we also began to learn that the publication history is a bit complicated. So this scan shows 4 volumes under the title of Musica sacra. It's the first entry that you hit when you look this up. She dates the first 4 volumes of this publication all to 1938, which is also not accurate, by the way, and is edited by Franz. That part is right. And she adds an intriguing note. She says, beginning with volume 5, Franz as editor and Bode Bach as publisher, each apparently began issuing separate publications under the name of Musica sacra. Each series began with volume 5, see next 2 entries. Okay, as it turned out, her apparently is unnecessary. There was indeed a split in the publication, which is a notable part of the story. Again, this is beautiful elsewhere. I will explain. The subsequent pages of Higher offer not 2, but 4 entries under the title Musica sacra that include one or the other element of Bode Bach and or Franz. So the first one, where the title is the Latin, that one is Politik et Editing Franziskus Kommer, so that one was actually edited by Kommer, but it's published with Chapline. The second one, the title is in German, that is published with Bode Bach, but Kommer's gone. Third one is edited by Franz, new series, published by Ruben and Kommer. And the fourth one is edited by, that's Raiders, but it is the re-edition of volumes 1 and 2 of Franz Kommer's Musica sacra, published by Bode Bach in the 1930s. Confused yet? I was. So, clearly there was more to learn about this curious publication. I turned to WorldCat in the hopes of finding copies that I could examine to start to figure things out. This was in the days of first search. It was primarily in the first search interface. As it turned out, WorldCat both answered and raised many questions. When I first started searching for this work in 2011, I found some 94 entries that I determined cataloged either this publication or some portion thereof. There was a great deal of ambiguity about the material type, including calling it a monographic series, a musical score, or a book. Within the musical score range, there were records for individual pieces of music that stemmed from the larger publication, including those about performance parts. The range of format types and cataloging approaches, including the cataloging of individual volumes, often with different editors on different records, with or without reference to the series, only added a layer of ambiguity. Dates on individual volumes also differed wildly. Clearly, I was not the only one with unanswered questions. I began tracking down physical copies of things that fell under the Musica sacra umbrella, since it seemed to me at this point that I would need to make my own determination of what it is and other bibliographic specifics. Indeed, given that individual volumes were sometimes cataloged under their own titles, and that it had been a rather odd editorial split that should Higher, rather than 5 entries for this title, I was beginning to question whether this was a real entity at all. The evidence from the volumes themselves was not entirely conclusive on this point. On the one hand, we have contemporary advertisements. This is an advertisement put out by the publisher that was inserted into one of the later volumes of Musica sacra. This is from volume 12. It shows that, regardless of whether this series was conceived of as a single entity on an editorial level, the publisher was advertising the series as a cohesive entity, with Franz as the editor for the first 4 volumes. So here we have the excerpt from this ad under volumes 4 and 5. Franz for the first 4 volumes, and then a change of editor with the 5th volume, as in Tibet and higher, to Neidhart, who was mentioned by Jessica Rollin. So the transition here is rather neatly smoothed over in the I would highlight, however, that at this point it is the publisher who is calling the series a cohesive entity. In addition, there are still no printed dates and no explanation for why the change in editor or for the existence of Homer's other publication, which was also called Musica, sacra. So, as a side note, so with the advertisement in front of us, I'd like to take a moment to clarify what the content of Musica, sacra is like, so to have a better idea of what the actual entities are. Although it is actually kind of difficult to describe precisely, because Musica, sacra has significant shifts in purpose and editorial direction over the course of its history. In general, though, each volume collects individual pieces of music that are somehow sacred, and the works are by a range of composers. So, each volume will contain many pieces of music. Those pieces are sacred or sacred-ish, and many different composers will be represented. Except for prefatory material, which does not necessarily exist for each volume, the contents consist entirely of pieces of music. The shifts that the publication underwent over its history included changes in genres emphasized, vocal versus instrumental music, Germanic versus non-Germanic composers, and historical versus contemporary works. So, it's impossible to pinpoint the content of the overall series with any more precision than I just described. Examination of the title pages of volumes 1 and 5 provided new information that was not entirely congruent with what I had learned before. So here is the title page to volume 1, found in the collections of Stokes in Berlin, and a transcription of the title. So it translates as a collection of the best masterworks from the 17th and 18th centuries for the organ, for use in church service and for study, collected and edited by Franz, property of the publishers, entered in the Society's archive, Berlin, with Moritz Westphal, and then is addressed by So, given what we thought we knew about this publication, one might be justified in questioning whether this is even the right item. It's the right thing. It says. The publisher is Moritz Westphal, not Loden Bach. Nowhere do the words Musica, sacra appear. There is no volume number, an indication that it's part of a series, and also, frustratingly, no printed date. Although there is actually, if you look here, there is a handwritten date, which was probably, handwritten date was probably provided by some kind of cataloger at the Stokes. But if we go back to Loden Bach's advertisement, we see that this is indeed the right volume. So the title is the same, collection of best masterworks in the 17th and 18th centuries for the organ, yada yada, edited by Franz. So it is not right, so there's a circle to be squared here. And the content in the ad, which is listed below, aligns with the content of the volume, which contains 4 works attributed to Bach, and then some like balloons, Buxtehude, Dominacker, who is not a real composer. That's a whole other story. Everything, Frescobaldi, Froberger, Rue, Muffat, and then taking a very large number of works, 97 works by Bach, Johann Walter, and F.W. Sacra, and 1 work with no composer given. So what's in the ad aligns with what's actually in the volume, so it has to be the same thing, so what's going on. Turning to the title page for volume 5, we see this. So this is a collection of religious song from older and more recent times, for particular use for the Royal Cathedral Choir and the Edenhard, and I skipped all these titles. And then the publisher information is Berlin Roslau Stedt, and it's published by Edward Loden Gustav Bach. Okay, at last we see Loden Bach as the publisher, or at least we see Loden Bach as the publisher here. But no Musica, sacra, no volume number, and no date. In addition, and intriguingly, there's now an overt association of this publication with one of the central institutions for state-supported church music in Prussia, the Royal Cathedral Choir. And as I continued to examine physical copies at the Newberry Library, I discovered that individual performance parts, as well as the collected volumes, were also advertised as available for sale. This suggests that the purpose of these Prussia was the second largest of the Germanic states after Austria. And as a reminder, if you're not into 19th century European history, Germany did not actually form as a political country until 1871. So Prussia was one of the many individual states and one of the most powerful states within a hotly contested cultural entity known as Germany that had not fully formed as a political presence. So as you can see here, Prussia itself was a patchwork of territories that extended beyond German-speaking areas into what is today Poland and Lithuania, right side, and it also included, we'll jump over territory that was not Prussian, the predominantly Catholic Rhineland. In the late 18-teens and 1820s, the King of Prussia, Friedrich Wilhelm III, had interfered tremendously with church practices by forcing a union of the Lutherans and Calvinists in Prussia into what was known as the Evangelische Kirche in Preußen, or the Prussian Union Church, which was an attempt to create greater unity among Prussian Protestants. This event was part and parcel of a larger conflict in Prussian society over the nature of national feeling, and whether people's political loyalties should center on the Prussian state and its monarchy, or the not yet extant German state and the German people. Musica, sacra, as a Berlin-based publication that eventually had an explicit connection to the Royal Cathedral Choir, had an inconsistent yet illuminating relationship to these different emotional orientations. This takes us to the shift in orientation of my research strategy on this publication. I decided to use tools such as retrospective indexed music periodicals to trace contemporary advertisements, mentions in articles, and as it turns out, reviews of individual volumes. I attempted to view as many copies of this work as I could, and in the process discovered that prefatory content and publisher information could vary from one instance of a volume to another, thus adding another wrinkle, vis-a-vis the content of the publication, and perhaps accounting for the proliferation of variant records presumably about the same thing. Very few libraries own a complete run of Musica Sacra in all its manifestations, but many libraries hold some or even single volumes. In turn, however, there is also a lack of clarity in library holdings, which sometimes conflate publications included in hybrid entries. So, I also continue to use WorldCat in this process to track down these individual volumes, but cautiously varying these problems with bibliographic control in mind. So, time does not permit me to review the process I went through for each individual volume. That would get a little tedious. So, and in fact, in the dissertation chapter, I limited my discussion to volumes 1 through 10 in the space and cohesiveness. A few highlights, however, will illustrate how the process brought forth not only a greater degree of bibliographic clarity, but stories of people, church music, and political trends. The volume that later became Volume 1 was indeed originally published by Maurice Westphal, not Bud Bach, as we saw in the Strasbibliothek copy of the title page. In 1839, thus providing a corrective to cover, Westphal advertised Homer's collection, which was not yet published, in the advertising section of the Neue Zeitschrift für Musik, i.e. Robert Schumann's journal. So the ad is actually two different columns, but the ad is the lower half of this slide. The title of the ad is a bit odd since in literal translation it would be prepayment without prepayment, which is nonsense. But it indicates a pre-subscription without a deposit here. So if they're looking for subscribers, then you don't have to put money down. The ad generally translates as, with the approval of a high minister in the Office of Spiritual, Educational, and Medicinal Matters, which is also, that was the cultism staring down in Prussia, but again, that's a whole other story. Why spiritual and medicinal? But with the approval of this high minister, Commerce Publication, which is then described at length in the middle of the ad, will appear with the publisher Maurice Westphal. Given the list of composers to be included, which includes Handel, Hassler, and Kellner, who didn't actually show up in the printed volume, and the future tense of the verbs, it is clear that at this point the list of works was not finalized and the volume was published. There is also, of course, no mention of the title of Musica Sacra, and I have no reason to believe that either Westphal or Palmer envisioned this volume as part of a series. Yet. This advertisement not only provides significant evidence about the date and original publisher, as well as series history, but it also continues to hint at the political import of the publication. 1832, so it was about 19. Sorry, yes, thank you. Kalmar moved across Prussia to Berlin to attend the Royal Institute for Church Music, where he received lessons and mentoring from some of the most central figures in Berlin's Protestant music scene, including both Adolf Marx, who was a central component of German nationalistic music criticism, and Karl von Winterfeld, a conservative Prussian patriot whose writings argued that the 17th century composer Johannes Eckart was the Prussian equivalent of Palestrina. Winterfeld arranged for Kalmar to have the task of organizing and cataloging the collections of the Royal Institute for Church Music, collections that included the music manuscripts that had belonged to Johann Nicholas Forkel, J.S. Bach's first biographer. These collections may have contributed to the first volume of Musica sacra. In spite of the approval and support of the Prussian government and his close relationship with Winterfeld, Kalmar's organ collection was not received as a particularly Prussian publication. In fact, quite the opposite. Indeed, the critical reception of this volume suggested that it was perceived as a tribute to German greatness of the organ. As one critic wrote it, last year a work appeared which unfortunately was not valued enough by those who are knowledgeable about art in our fatherland. Although they should be interested in such a work, since the organ can be correctly named the instrument that was cultivated in Germany, and with few exceptions is and will be played worthily only in Germany. In addition, and fitting with the alignment of the Bach revival with German nationalistic feeling, the volume was also understood to be largely about Bach, even though it included very little Bach and was actually dominated by Pachelbel. Another critic justified this view, saying, from Sebastian Bach, the collector included only a few numbers that had not yet been brought to light by Marx. That was Amy Marx, Bach's active follower and publicizer. On the other hand, there are even more from the predecessors of this greatest of German church music composers. So much that is excellent among these, the motivation for the towering heights of Bach stands there, appearing rather less above the numerically built in the clouds. Thus, according to this critic, even if it doesn't include very much Bach, this collection is still all about Bach. More generally, even with the support of the Prussian government, there was still a critical urge to view this collection as Germanic in orientation. Okay, Westphal's firm was purchased by Bach in 1840, which explains the change in publishers, and Kalmar continued to work on Musica sacra for 3 more volumes. For volumes 2 and 3, volume 2, Musica called Musica sacra both in the table of contents and in the reviews, so the series title and the way it emerges. For volumes 2 and 3, there are dated prefaces in some, but not all, in some exemplars, which not only clear up the date question, but also show Kalmar carefully stepping away from the political questions that were evidently raised by the first collection. The preface to volume 2, which I found in a copy at the University of Amsterdam, is dated August 1841. And the preface to volume 3, which I found in the local library at Harvard, is dated April 1843. These prefaces reveal Kalmar's grappling with questions of interpreting early music notation, a concern that continues to haunt music lovers to this day. And the contents of the volumes shifts to a new dominance of Renaissance Italian church music. These changes perhaps suggest that Kalmar was discomfited by the critical association of his first volume with German nationalism, compelling him to move to a more abstract and intellectual stance in his music collecting work. Volume 4 was Kalmar's final volume with Bach, and it is an odd one out of the series in many ways, being a collection of vocal music for alto voice with piano accompaniment, largely consisting of oratorio excerpts, which, while still sacred and topical orientation, is nonetheless less suitable for 19th century Protestant church services than the content of the previous 3 volumes. This change in genre may or may not have contributed to Kalmar's break with Bach. He was certainly also enjoying a great deal of success in other areas, including sponsorship from the Dutch government to do research on Orlando Velasco, and taking a position as the choir director of St. Hedwig's Cathedral in Berlin. The latter appointment, however, could also be seen as a reaffirmation of Kalmar's Catholicism. So, if both church. That was a problem. But Rodenbach's self-published history states that the project changed to a new editor when Comer died. They say in the following years, that is after Rodenbach acquired Westphal, Rodenbach issued 15 further volumes of solo song and choral music. It was after Comer's death entrusted to lead church musicians such as Nephi, Bradley, Gettysburg, and Albert Becker. But Comer actually lived until 1987, which is well after the series ended, with another 12 volumes having been published, and also outliving Peter by 26 years in the process. So, it wasn't dead. And although Comer was no longer involved with Rodenbach's Musica Sacra, the firm continued to reprint, repackage, and sell the volumes that he had edited for many years afterwards. I will now turn to the volumes under H.E. Neidhart's editorship, which, as Judith Silver-Rollin indicated, were volumes 5 and 7, although not with their stated dates of 1853 and 1865. Volume 5 was advertised as available for purchase in 1852, but thus must have been published by then. Volume 6 was advertised and available for sale in 1854, and Volume 7 was mentioned in an article in 1859, but may have been published before Volume 8, the preface of which is dated November 1855. This makes sense with the editor Neidhart's biography, since he died in 1861. At any rate, Volume 7 was published at least 6 years and perhaps even 10 years before 1865. The turn to a more clearly Prussian-oriented stance in Volume 5 is indicated not only by the mention of the cathedral choir in the title, but also by the facing page, the title page, which features a portrait of Neidhart, which we see here, and the incipit of his composition, Ich bin ein Preuße, kennt ihr meine Farbe, or I am a Prussian, do you recognize my colors? Yeah. Before Neidhart became the director of the cathedral choir, he had spent many years in the Prussian military music establishment, and he had composed this piece as a candidate for a Prussian national song. Its appearance at the beginning of a volume of Musica Sacra indicates a pro-Prussian stance not taken by this editor and by Rodenbach. The purpose of Volume 5 of Musica Sacra also changed to a focused emphasis on disseminating a set of compositions by a range of historical and contemporary composers to be used in church services. In Neidhart's preface, he cites the translation into German of selections of works by composers such as Palestrina and Lotti as part of this emphasis on accessibility for congregations. The content included excerpts from masses, psalm settings, and settings of the Prussian evening liturgy, with a generally chronological trajectory over the course of the volume, leading to works by contemporary composers such as the recently deceased Felix Bartholdy and by Neidhart himself. The contemporary composers included were all associated with the Prussian monarchy in one way or another, most of them affiliated with the cathedral choir. Mendelssohn was the most famous of these, and his liturgical setting had been written at the king's request, so it is unsurprising that a movement from it is included, although it's a movement title only, so it doesn't say just a liturgy, it just means the movement. For the first time, too, was a work by Johannes Eckhart, putative Prussian Palestrina, included in a volume of Musica Sacra. Eckhart then figures quite heavily in Volume 6. Although there were numerous works by non-Prussians, including Palestrina and Lotti, there is nonetheless a subtle but discernible shift in the repertoire included to focus on Prussian musical achievement. I would speculate that this constitutes a reaction to the failed revolutions of 1848, with government institutions such as the state church digging in their heels, so to speak, on Prussian nationalism in response to the German nationalistic revolutionaries. Volume 7 is organized similarly to Volume 5, the general and chronological suite. In comparison with Volume 5, though, it backs away from the focus on specifically Prussian composers to a more broad ecumenical range of works, perhaps indicating more distance from the revolution, although the chronology it presents still culminates in Felix Mendelssohn. It encompasses an array of works from the 16th through 18th centuries with a strong representation of Heinrich Schütz and ending with two movements from Mendelssohn's Liturgie, but again, they will only with their movement titles. In general, of Neidhart's Bach's volumes, we can say that they are organized in terms of a progression or genealogy of composers, generally pointing toward recent composers associated with the cathedral choir as a combination. Franz, in the meanwhile, threw himself into his Lhasa research, as is made evident by the contents of his rival version of Musica, sacra, which he began publishing in Trautwein in 1860. In a lengthy article about Kummer that appeared in Bibliographic Musica von Kunstfreund und Künstler in 1860, reporter Ludwig Bischoff reviews the contents of the 4 volumes of Musica, sacra that Kummer had edited, that is, the ones I just discussed, and then in some detail, and then he launches into a description of the new publication of Trautwein, without mentioning that Kummer's series had continued with Bode and Bach without him. Given that Bode and Bach continued to republish and re-edit Kummer's volumes for many years afterwards, into the 1930s, it appears that the company continued to reassert their rights over the intellectual property contained in the volumes. This aspect of the situation suggests another potential reason for the split and for the rivalry, not only politics and religion, but also a potential dispute over rights and concomitantly profits. To bring this to a conclusion, although there is a great deal more to be said about Musica, sacra, even this brief examination of both its reconstructed publication history and the relevant personal and political stories that were discovered through this research has made possible a new way of looking at musical nationalism in the mid-19th century. The parallel existence of strands of German nationalism and Prussian nationalism in church music sheds a new light on how political conflicts played themselves out in musical and religious life, and how pieces of music, often detached from their larger works, took on new meaning that had little to do with their original contexts. The changing editorial tendencies found in Musica, sacra are emblematic of the complex mix of historical speaking found in mid-19th century sacred music. It demonstrates that even within the countries that became Germany a few decades later, there were counter-narratives that were eventually buried in the overwhelming tide of German-centric music history that was promulgated in the rest of the 19th and the relative 20th century. It has also revealed the personal story of the perils of litigating intellectual property and provides clarity, explanation, and newly discovered specifics about an otherwise highly confusing publication history. So thank you for allowing me to conclude this story.
This thing about intellectual property is kind of interesting. There's a couple of questions I have to ask. Was music copyrightable in Prussia in the 19th century? Because some places music was copyrightable and other places it was not. That's one question. Number 2, did Bode and Bach continue to strike off the same plates, or did they reset it later?
I know the answer to the second part. They used the same place.
Okay, so it's just like...
yeah, so they were just, and it's that interview to this property of the publisher that was put on the title page of volume 1, and it belonged to Westphal, and Westphal sold to Bode and Bach, and said, well, we own this, and the degree to which that resulted in dispute is a little hard to say, but I suspect it was definitely a factor. I'm trying to think about the copyright issue. I do believe you could copyright things in Prussia at that time. I mean, another big question would be if you copyrighted in Prussia, would you still be able to publish it in the state area? Or would it be pirated in the area, which is entirely likely. So I would need to use it.
I know you got to travel a lot for your research. What were some of the interesting places?
Some of the places I went to. I mean, I did the bulk of the work. So there are fairly more or less complete run of thing that you consider the Bode and Bach publication up to the reeditions of the Newberry Library. And then also a lot of time
Two questions. So some of the advertisements you were showing, is that stuff that would have been printed on the like other publications like the publisher advertising it, or did you find those in another source?
So the advertisements I found were either inserted into individual volumes. However, I would speculate that those volumes were generally later reprints, and the fact that there are no dates, any of them, makes that super frustrating. But I am fairly certain that volumes would be originally published, volume 1 was published in 1839, and it was reprinted as an unstable intervals after that, and other stuff would get removed or added as reprints. Yeah, so like the preface would vanish. Right? You're going to read that in a later reprint. Or they would just slap book bar where it used to say that's wrong. So some of the advertisements, like the one that I showed, the fairly complete list of volumes, was inserted into volume 12. Other advertisements were from newspapers. So the Intelligencer one from Schumann's journal was actually a list of newspapers. And how parents like the newly published books and notes, right? So yeah, they would also show newspapers.
And the second thing you mentioned that you found a lot of most citations from First Search or OCLC. How much of that stuff were you able to acquire from interlibrary loan, or did you have to travel to all the places that you just mentioned to really figure this out?
But yeah, I had to go. I mean, these are rare volumes from the late 1830s into I was working into the 1860s, and people are not going to send this. I was able to get microphones and a microphone tapes, and of course a couple of places of digitizing. But other than that, you have to go there.
Okay, thank you, Lawrence.